Thank you very much for your time, Danny Younis. Firstly, I'm really interested in you telling us about your wine journey and how it began, essentially.
Yeah, it started when I was about 16, 17. Yes, below the legal age, actually. So what happened is one of my brothers used to work for a German importer here in Sydney. Now, he used to bring home these wines from the 40s and 50s, these, Baron Auslesers, TBAs from producers. I can't even remember the names. I remember the labels, but I think like Niedertaler and, they're unknown now. They're not the great producers like Prum and Muller, etc. But he'd bring back these TBAs and BAs from the 40s and 50s because they couldn't sell them because they were leaking. As you know, with a lot of German wines, the corks were out and they were leaking and they were like honey. And so we'd drink these wines. And up until, 16, 17, I'd never tried wine. I didn't even like beer. And these wines were like honey. They were just magnificent. And they really, really changed, how I thought about wine. And I thought this is really intriguing. There's a wonderful balance here between the art of creating wine and the science of creating wine. So I thought I wanted to pursue it further. So I did. So, going on to 17, maybe 18, I tried to research as much as possible. So what I did is there used to be a paper at the time called the National Times here in Australia. I don't know if you remember it in the 80s.
Absolutely, Len.
And there was a wine reviewer there called Nick Bolide, who I believe is still around.
He is. Nick Bolide. It has a vineyard in Orange. Still
oh, wow. Okay.
Master of wine. He is still absolutely around.
Yes. So it was the best wines of the year in Australia for that year. Would have been, I don't know, 86, 87. And it was a 1984 Bowen estate. That was the number. I still vividly remember the page and everything. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try and contact every retailer in the country to try and get this 1984 Bowen estate Coonawarra Cabernet. So that started my journey in Australia. And then within 6 months, I was so passionate about it. I bought my first grange from the used to be a Roseville Cellars up here on the North Shore in Sydney.
I know exactly where it is. Just on Hill Street, Upper Hill Street,
correct,
isn't it?
Near the station, absolutely. So Sandy, who I believe is still around these days, owned that business. So he got me into Grange, and Grange then was like $37, $38 a bottle. So within 6 months of becoming of legal age, I was buying Grange, and then he said, you should look to Bordeaux and all this sort of stuff. And at the time, he was putting out this monthly newsletter, and it was the 82 Bordeaux that were coming out at the time,
right?
And they were all getting these wonderful scores. And I read these effusive tasting notes from Robert Parker, and I thought, geez, this sounds like my cup of tea, and concurrent with getting those newsletters and visiting, Spezial Cellars in Wahroonga and, Roseville Cellars, I got a job when I got into uni at a place called Sheargold Cellars. Now, they were in Pymble, Gordon, and in the city, and they had a Central Coast store as well. It was owned by Mike Willis's Transurban family, the media guru. And there they'd have wine tastings as well. So I was trying all these Bordeaux as well. So that just really made me, get a lot more excited. So that was the second iteration of my growth. And when I was 18 years old, it was really getting into those 82 Bordeaux. And geez, I bought a lot. Everything I was earning at the time, even my Austudy payments, which are the payments you got when you were at uni, all went to towards these first, second, third growth Bordeaux. And then a couple of years later, probably when I got to about 20. I had my Burgundy epiphanies. So the issue there was, well, it wasn't an issue. I started going to auctions because a guy at Sheargolds told me, he was Penfolds collector at the time. He goes, go to auction, you get these really, really cheap wines. And he sent me this catalogue, and there was an auction out here in Sydney, and there were some DRCs, which I'd read about before. And I remember they were the 78 DRCs.
Wow.
And it was the Latache, RSV, Richebourg, and Romani Conti. And for 3 of those 4 wines, I was the only bidder in the room, and they went from $60 to $80, $85, $86 at the time. Believe it or not, Romani Conti for $86, $87. So I bought those wines, and at the same time, there was another wine that
78 Latache is like one of the wines of the century.
Well, I was going to say the 78 Latache and the 78 RSV were 2 of my epiphany wines. And then I had a 1985 Domaine Ponceau Clos de la Roche, which I thought was even better than those wines. It was an amazing wine, and that gave me the Burgundy bug. So that's how it all sort of evolved.
Started collecting. You started buying. You started in this like secondary market, really,
Yep.
very young. How did that secondary market interest grow? Like, how did you? Did you again? You just put all your money in? Did you have people you would put, who would give you money to invest on behalf of them? Were you
No,
trying to make money out of it, or was it
no.
just?
The idea of me being passionate, and I'm a bit of an obsessive compulsive sort of guy. When I like something, I really like something, and even like at auction, if I bid on something, I bid to ensure that I win. I'm not there
Yep.
to keep bidding after hours and all that sort of stuff. So
Mhm.
the idea was to learn as much as possible about wine,
Okay.
and that was wines across all the regions. And even to this day, I have eclectic taste. It's you find most collectors after 20, 30, 40 years, they tend to hone in on one specific area, like they focus on Burgundy, or particularly Burgundy, Australia, for example. I still have an incredible passion for the wines that aren't well known. The Massandra dessert wines, Hungary Tokais, German Rieslings, Spanish wines, Chilean wines. At the moment, I'm going through a big US phase, albeit they're pretty expensive. But it was always a passion at the beginning. It was never a strategy to become an investment, and I still don't
Yep.
believe wine is investment. The issue is, Angus, go forward 30 years later, I've ended up with 8,000 bottles.
Back to you and your wine. So I assume you visited many great wine regions, right?
Mm.
So what's your favorite, somewhere you've been where it was just a moment in time that you will never forget?
Look, it's hard to go past Burgundy, largely because there are so many iconic estates there. And it wasn't so much the wines themselves, but it was more the topography, the geography, the vineyards. I don't think I'll ever forget the first time I went to, obviously, all the great vineyards, Mussini and Montrachet and Romani Conti, La Tâche. It's great to just cycle or walk around those areas. So I think that would probably be my favorites. But I've always been of the view is that I would only travel to a country if there were vineyards. That's how passionate I was about wine. It's even a few years back, actually. Now I even went to Arizona, and I was in Arizona, and there's a burgeoning wine industry there.
Yep. Yep.
But a beautiful area. So again, most wine areas are actually quite lovely, but Burgundy would probably be number one for me.
If you were going to pick five wines that you just went, those wines, and I know it's hard. People ask me this all the time, and I can't even think about what happened last week. I can't, but couple of two. It doesn't need to be five. Just a couple of wines. We just went, that wine, that moment, that wine is just, wine doesn't get better than that.
In general, or just in Burgundy?
Right, in general. In general.
And are we talking like best ever, or are we talking just wines that I would usually?
Oh no, we're talking about just a wine that was just, it just blew your head. It blew your mind. It could be something you didn't expect, or it could be an international icon.
Oh, I think there have been many. I think one of the first ones would have been, I think, the first vintage of Cru Clos de Mainil. And I think it was around 79. There was a 79,
okay.
and I think there was a 1980 as well. A 1980, which not many champagne houses made 1980s. I think Dom Perignon did. So they were two, because they were the first two releases. That just knocked my socks off. To me, that was the next level of champagne. I'd always been a middling champagne drinker, but that took it to the next level. In terms of really old wines, I'm a big passionate lover of Madeira. So I had Madeira wines back to 1730. I know they're old fashioned, but I used to pick these up for a song, and you can't. Now the prices are gone nuts, particularly if you look at Christie's and Sotheby's in London, where I often do, and they still get old Madeiras. The prices now have gone nuts, but old Madeiras are magnificent wines. The etherealness of the nose, the complexity of the taste, I still think they're incredibly underrepresented in cellars and underappreciated by palates. So that would be another one. In terms of the great wines of the world, I mean, you can't go past. I think I had it at my 40th birthday. It was the 1962 Penfolds Bin 68.
Yeah,
I would not only consider that the greatest Australian wine I've ever had, but probably in the top three of all time. made
Yep.
anywhere. And I've had that wine now 4 times. And the first time I had it, I just had to go out, being very passionate, to find this bottle of wine. And McGill Estate in Adelaide at the time, I was working at CBA. McGill Estate in Adelaide had 4 bottles of that wine for $2,000 that had been recorked at that clinic.
Love it.
So I picked
Of
them up
course.
for $8,000.
Yep.
So that was another big epiphany for me. As I mentioned earlier, those 78 DRCs and the Ponceau Clos de la Roches were definitely there. And in Bordeaux, there was one Bordeaux that just, I've had plenty of old Bordeaux that have knocked my socks off, but the 1945 Petrus is the one that it just floored me. I was silent for a minute. The whole room was silent at the time. It was an extraordinary fundamental shift in the market for a lot of these blue chip wines. A lot of the wines now that are coming out, particularly blue chips, are now priced so high retail, you can pick them up for 30 to 50% below auction. At auction, things like Vogüé, Mio Camusé, Ponceau, even outside Burgundy. If you go, first growths that were $1,800 at En Primeur, like Cheval Blanc and Orson, you can pick up for $1,200, $1,300. Massetto, you can pick up for $1,000, and they're $2,500 at retail now. So there's a widening disparity in the market between retail and resale at the moment. As to your question, is this going to diverge? Is this the new normal? Is this going to worsen? It's really hard to say. Given the dynamic changes systemically and structurally in the industry, I suspect it's going to go on longer than expected. I think that this pricing weakness is going to remain for a while. You've got China, where the status gift giving has been now outlawed. So they were a significant portion of the market. If you believe in ACCA's report, they were 30% of the market. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and China, they're gone. Okay. And they're the ones that really drove up the cult producers like Bizot, Arnaud Lachaud, Hubert Lamy, or all those cult producers, plus the blue chips like DRC. Loire's had a big fall from grace. The Mussini that used to sell for 50 to 100 grand a bottle, only 600 bottles made. That's now you can pick it up for 30 grand. And there's been a few at Langton's recently that haven't even sold at 30, 35 grand. So that pricing deflation, I think, is something that's going to continue. Are we at a bottom? It's really, really hard to say at the moment. My appraisal of the market right now is it's going to remain weak for another 12 months at least. And that's a great opportunity. That's why in the last 12 months, I've bought 2,000 bottles of wine, because the price at which I sold them at 2 years ago, I'm now picking them up 30, 40% cheaper.
Wow. So what you're basically saying is the secondary, for people new to wine, the secondary market really is offering an immense opportunity.
Yeah, you don't need to suffer from FOMO anymore. You don't need to worry that you're never going to get access, DRC or Ramonet or Raveno or Rousseau at retail. It used to be at retail. The retail managers would always say to you, well, and this is in the beginning of my journey, we can't give you those wines because you don't spend 50, 100 grand a year with us. Okay.
Yeah.
I think those days are over, because you do have an option now where there's huge volumes on the secondary market and they're cheaper.
What interests you at the moment? What kind of wines are you buying at the moment?
I still buy everything. So I look for really old wines. I still love Australian vintage ports from the 50s, 60s and 70s. I think they're bargains. You can get them for 50, 60 bucks. So I'm still buying them. I'm buying wines that are great vintages from the 60s and 70s when they occasionally come up. I'm still looking for old Madeiras. In Australia, I'm not buying a lot of stuff because I largely get everything from mailing lists or retailers. In terms of offshore, I love Lebanese wines. I'm of Lebanese origin myself, so I had Messars back to the 70s, and I'm still a big fan of Messars. To me, it has that X factor. That X factor for many people is, VA and Funk and Brett and all that sort of stuff. But they have cleaned up in the last 3-4 vintages, so I still love them, particularly with a 12-hour decant. They're usually fine. So I still pick up those old vintages. Burgundy, you can get some wonderful bargains, as I alluded to earlier. Why spend $4,500, $5,000 on a bottle of Rousseau Chambertin when I can pick it up for $3,500 at auction?
And there's other, like we did a dinner last couple of weeks ago where we had some Trappe Chambertin. It was just,
Yeah, they're lovely.
oh, you know, it's $1,000, right? Like, it's not
Yeah.
cheap, but it was really, and I think Neil Martin, my colleague, my Venice colleague, I think it was only a point between Trappe and Rousseau.
Right, yeah.
And so they're in
Yeah,
the,
and Rossignol Trappe makes a really good one too.
that's what I meant. That's what I meant. Rossignol Trappe. Yep.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. So I'm buying anything that I really love.
Yeah.
And there's a lot out there. Even Bordeaux first grades. Like I won't play EP anymore. I think that's an absolute farce. And I think the Bordelais have a lot to blame themselves for what they've done, particularly since 2009, 2010, which were record vintages in terms of pricing.
Yeah.
And it's been downhill since then. The market's just said no. You know, there's oversupply. The pricing isn't there. The market isn't there. I think they shot themselves in the foot, and buyers like myself are benefiting from that now.
Someone new to the auction market, what would be like your top tips for them?
Well, I think the most important thing if you're buying from anywhere is provenance. Now, I often get the argument that auctions, you don't know what you're getting, you don't know where they've been stored, but I would say the same thing about retailers. I mean, I reckon 95, and I had a list of 70 retailers I used to deal with around Australia, which is how I got all these great allocations, because I was very aggressive in calling them up and, you know, paying for them straight away. Anyone who's been to a retailer knows at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. whenever they shut, they don't have air conditioning on in the middle of summer. So, I know that a lot of warehouses on the auction circuit do, and I know they're well stored. And if you call, I always used to hassle the auctioneers, or the people that worked in the warehouses, to give me a report on the condition of the wines. You know, did they know the seller? Did they know the vendor? Has he or she been a regular buyer, seller, long relationship? You visited the premises. So you've got to do your homework. I think that's the most important thing about provenance. You want to ensure that what you're getting is rigid in terms of authenticity and in terms of it's been well stored. The second thing is the other second piece of advice is you can often get a wine that has a clipped label, or maybe a little bit something on the screw cap or the aluminium foil that's been damaged slightly. You can get it 10 to 20% cheaper than a pristine bottle. So I'm not too worried about pristine labels. I know some of my friends are. They wrap all their bottles in Glad wrap and all that sort of stuff. I couldn't care less. But for people who think maybe, okay, $100 is too expensive for me to buy this bottle, but with a chipped label or a soiled label, and they can pick it up for $75, $80, I think that's a good buy, provided the provenance is good. The third thing is really follow what you love. I always bought what I loved. Okay. Don't follow that, DRC is the wine to buy, or Petrus is the wine to buy, or Hill of Grace Grange is the wine to buy. I think you've got to buy what you love. Like many people, I think many people fell into this trap. I 20 years ago, I bought a lot of these big Barossa Shirazes as well, because it was all over the media how great these wines were. And either they fell over, or they didn't move, or develop in any way, or evolve in any way, and they were disappointing. So don't be swayed by what the media or wine writers tell you. Go to as many tastings as you can. I used to go to all, Oak Barrel here in Sydney, Five Way Cellars in Sydney, Bests in Surrey Hills, Roseville Cellars. I used to go to all the free tastings. So find out what you like and buy what your palate likes. Don't be influenced by what other people. I think today, I notice a lot of young people who are getting into wine, they're very influenced by social media, what's trending on Instagram and all this sort of stuff. I've never had any interest in any of that stuff. I've always focused on the classics. And I think that's always a good rule to follow.
One very last question. So let's take Burgundy out of the mix, right? But if you're a young man or woman, you're getting to wine, you've got some money to spend, but you don't have you've just got your second job, and you're close to six figures, but your rent's like $20,000 or something, right? So what region would you start them off? If they were going to leave Australia, where would you start them off in the fine wine world?
I think France is the logical choice. And you can still get fantastic Bourgognes from Burgundy for less than $100. Some of the negotiant wines are really good. You know, the Bouchards,
Yeah.
the Louis Jadots. They're fantastic wines, and even some of the PYCMs you can get for $120. So it's not an onerous cost. I think the value is more there than in the Grand Cru's and the Premier Cru's.
Yep.
So I think that's the first thing I would say. I would say get on as many mailing lists as you possibly can here in Australia. There's still a lot of great wines under $100, like the Wenduris, like the Basket Presses, etc. And I taste widely as well. You know, Rhone Valley, Champagne. Like in Champagne, for example, if you've got $70-$80 to spend, why go get Verve or Moet when you can get a grower champagne like La Mandia Bernier for $80-$90? You know, a little bit more of a premium, but still under $100. You can get some great champagnes for those prices. You know, the champagnes with character, low dosage. They speak of the terroir. They're either single vineyards, single vintage, single grape varietal. They're just a lot more interesting than the mass-produced stuff that's coming out of the big houses, which are good in their own way. So there's still a lot of value in that under $100 category, even in France, I think.
Any
Bordeaux's
other? What about outside the let's take away Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, right? Because they're kind of the classics, right? What about Saumur or Alsace or
absolutely
things like.
Absolutely, like Mosel and Rieslings out of Germany are still fantastic, and they're well under $100 per bottle. Lebanon, you can buy. Lebanon's got over 70 wineries now, which are making fantastic wines under $100. You know, Moussar is the other one. You got Chateau Saint Thomas, you got Xara, Cafreya, all making really interesting things. You've got Chile and Argentina now, who are making really good ones. South Africa is a really good one of mine. I've been really impressed by some of the Sadie family wines, which have been really good as well. You've got the classic fresh whites out of Greece and Italy, southern Italy, which are fantastic as well. Hungary is now making really good dry wines as well.
Ferment.
In fact, absolutely ferment. Yep. And Hasselhoff. Now, there's plenty of regions which are really expensive, which I don't suggest people go to. Like the Napa and US wines are still prohibitively expensive, unfortunately. So that doesn't help. But there's plenty else from everywhere else. New Zealand is fantastic. Like New Zealand, like some of the Syrahs they're making now are fantastic as well. You know, the Casuda, the Bell Hill, the Chardonnays and Pinots are fantastic, albeit they're a little bit more expensive as well. So the world's your oyster. You know, 30, 40 years ago, it was Australia, France, maybe the US and Italy, and that was really it. I think there's a lot more choice now, and there's a lot more diversity. And I think the wine industry is all the better for it. So I never wanted to be one of these people who just focuses on Burgundy or just focuses on Bordeaux.
Awesome. I think that'll do us just fine, Dan.